You have to have enormous reservoir of courage to make progress in this area. Aristotle said courage is the leadership attribute that makes all other leadership attributes possible. Start with courage, balance that with deep ethics, caring, kindness, compassion, nurturing, support, empathy. Have a really clear-eyed sense of reality, and then a vision for a desired future state into which you can invite people. And if you can do that, then you have a chance of making this work.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of The Conscious Capitalists with myself, Timothy Henry, and my partner in making the world a better place through business, Raj Sisodia. Hey there, Raj.
Hey, Timothy. Good to be with you again.
Good to be with you. In fact, today, I would venture to argue that we probably have one of the most important episodes that we're going to have this year, in the sense of the gentleman that we're going to be interviewing stands for a topic and has lived through a topic that we think is going to be core to where businesses go in the future and will sit at the core of what we call the future of the conscious enterprise. So, Doug Kirkpatrick, hello and welcome to our show.
Hello, Timothy. Hello, Raj. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let me give you a brief background on Doug, and then I want Doug to jump in with his seminal story of being in first grade. Um, but first of all, Doug was the financial controller for a feisty startup called Morningstar, which is now a billion-dollar integrated food processor and the largest player in its industry. He introduced with the founder, the startup team, the core principles of self-management, which were quickly adopted. And at Morningstar, he learned the organizational self-management is real, it works, and it creates space for extraordinary performance. In 2008, he co-founded the Morningstar Self-Management Institute with the mission of promoting organizational self-management principles through education tools and practices. He's also a co-founder of organizational transformative collective known as The Vibrancy and founder of Dartang Advisors. He now works with leaders around the world to create better workplaces. He's a speaker for TEDx and Forbes, and he's the author of 2 Amazon bestsellers, Beyond Empowerment: From Hierarchy to High Performance, and the No Limits Enterprise, which I highly recommend for those of you that are interested in pursuing this further. Doug, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Timothy.
So begin. It's first grade. You're at the very beginning. And what happened?
Yeah, so growing up in northern Montana, we didn't really have kindergarten. So first grade was the introduction to education. And so my first day of first grade, the very first assignment our lovely teacher, Mrs. Duden, gave us was to color a buffalo, an outline of a buffalo.
As one does in northern
Yes.
Montana, right?
Yeah, yes, of course. A very, very native animal to the area. And so her instructions were very specific. We were to use brown crayons to color the buffalo. And I knew that the mane of a buffalo was often black and darker in color. And so I chose to use a black crayon because I felt creative and I wanted to color it the way I wanted to color it. And Mrs. Duden made a point of holding up my paper and telling me that I'd failed the assignment because I didn't follow instructions and I did it wrong. And that was a searing experience. It was literally the first assignment of the first day of first grade. And so that sort of colored my understanding of the world forevermore. And I found myself just being a person who questioned everything from that point forward. So it was kind of an interesting experience that way.
Yeah. And I love that you often refer to that as this balance between freedom and responsibility or accountability. And that theme sort of is like a red thread through a lot of the work that you've done. And I'm trying to imagine, you're back sitting around a table with the Morningstar startup team, right? Now, just for the record, this is a billion-dollar business today, the largest producer of tomato paste in the world. If you've had a pizza odds are that the tomato paste came from Morningstar. And you're sitting around the table saying, okay, well, we're in the tomato and tomato paste business. Let's do self-management. How does that happen? You're sitting around. What was that dialogue like?
It was very interesting. So all credit to the founder, Chris Roofer. He envisioned an organization based on principles of self-management. And we had a core team of about 24 people. I was the admin, the financial controller, the IT guy, HR, risk management, all the rest, accounting, marketing. And then everyone else was, for the most part, they were technicians, they were mechanics, electricians, and the like. And so we had a core team, and we were working in a tiny farmhouse on a dusty canal bank here in Northern California in the spring of 1990. And our founder had pulled us together in January, February of that year, and we were just working out of this little farmhouse, building a state-of-the-art factory just down the road. And one day he came into the farmhouse, into the kitchen, a conference table there, and said, I'd like to talk to colleagues about how to organize the company. I have some ideas about that. And so we said, great. And so we met at night in a double wide construction trailer out on the job site. We sat around in a circle on steel folding chairs, and Chris handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. And essentially, the principles boiled down to two things. The first principle was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. If you think about that principle, it's foundation of all law everywhere in the world, whether you're in India or South America or Russia or anywhere else in the world. Every law against assault and battery, theft, burglary, kidnapping, murder, all the rest is predicated on the non-use of force against human beings. The second principle was that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. So if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And that principle is also foundational to law. Contract law would mean nothing if parties didn't fulfill their obligations to each other. And so we discussed and debated these principles for a couple hours. And at the end of the evening, we just looked around a circle at each other and said, we don't have any objections to these principles. They're self-evident principles. And so we adopted them as the entire governance of the enterprise. And as we filed out of that trailer at night, in that moment, we became a self-managed enterprise. So in March of 1990, we still had a lot of work to do. We had thousands, tens of thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state of California. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory and drive the trucks. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site 24 hours a day, constructing, fabricating, welding. We had vital equipment arriving from Parma, Italy on ocean cargo freighters out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, waiting to go through the Panama Canal. But finally, on July 16th of 1990, we turned on the factory and we produced 45 million kilograms, about 90 million pounds of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market. We changed the cost structure of our industry virtually overnight, and we did it without a single human boss. No bosses, no managers of others, no supervisors, no titles, zero command authority. Simply professionals working together and as an aligned team toward a common mission.
I'm fascinated. So, you were eventually the COO, but at that time you were sort of running the financials. And I'm going like, yeah, I have a self-managed budget. And and I'm wondering, like, okay, was there just a little bit of reverent skepticism on your part in terms of like, how are we going to run this? And I've got to put together a budget, and we've got expenses, and you know, because that's the nuts and bolts of the traditional business. And here you were saying, oh, we're going to self-manage. So, what was it like then? And more importantly, what's the big lesson that you took away from that around budgeting more and financial management more generally?
Actually, that's an interesting question because it wasn't a surprise to me because I'd worked with the founder for 7 years before Morningstar. So I knew how he liked to handle numbers and budgeting and cash flow and management and all the things that go into that. So none of it was a surprise to me. I will say it was quite a surprise to the outside world that didn't understand self management. Many people, competitors, and other businesses and leaders predicted massive failure and couldn't quite understand how this entire project could come together in such a short period of time and be so successful.
And what was the lesson for you from when you go out and talk to outside people about budget and financial control, so to speak? Um, what does that mean in the self-managed context?
It's very much about understanding cash. Cash is king. Cash flow is the lifeblood of the enterprise, and so if you know your cash situation to the penny at any given moment in time, then you're in control, and we did, and we could do that. So it was very much not about creating budgets and holding people to account for variances in predicted spending. It was very much about dynamic budgeting, dynamic event planning, and cash flow management, and just knowing where you're at any given moment in time. We had to account for things on an accrual method for the outside world. It was really a cash method that was just adjusted to look like accrual-based accounting. We knew our cash to the penny at all times.
So I'm just pressing a little bit on that. When you go to a new company and you're saying, "Hey, let's put this dynamic budgeting, dynamic financial management in place." How do you begin that dialogue with them?
Trying to teach people that they actually have more control, not less control, when they adopt a kind of a dynamic, uh, event-based dynamic accounting system and cash flow. We would, project, numbers 2 to 5 years into the future. On a monthly basis. And it was really just a giant spreadsheet that let us play with assumptions and play all kinds of what if games. So we knew what our best case was. We knew what would probably happen. We knew what the worst case was. We were always adjusting and playing with numbers. Morningstar has cash flow budgets going back to inception. I mean, going back to 1990. If you papered the wall, it would probably be 100 feet of budgeting. It's all the actuals by a month forever, the entire history, but then is projecting, as far into the future as makes sense, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And you know where you're gonna be in some sense at all times. You know exactly what the cash is. You can look a little pro forma budgeting P&Ls and balance sheets and understand your leverage and your strengths at all times. And you know where every penny is going. It's very much aligned with a group called the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable out of Europe, and they know this stuff very well. It's it's not rigid, hierarchical, imposed numbers that to which you managers hold people account. It's people just adjusting and making decisions that will create excess expected spending or less expected spending. It doesn't matter as long as you're following the mission of the business and getting the job done.
Well, Doug, I'd like to go back to the beginning. So you said the CEO. What's his name again? The CEO of Morningstar.
So the founder of Morningstar is Chris Roofer, and he does not consider himself a CEO. He totally eschews the title of CEO.
So I'm sure you know his backstory. So what brought him to this realization or this idea? What was the spark behind that?
Well, he is a very driven guy and very idealistic. And so over the course of his career, he got an MBA from UCLA and started driving a tomato truck in the early 70s, and he would drive his tomato truck into existing factories, and he would realize how incredibly inefficient those factories were. They would have him park on a siding for hours at a time, wasting his time, preventing him from picking up other loads and making money. And he would try to offer suggestions on how to improve their processes, which were highly bureaucratic. And nobody wanted to listen to him. They didn't care. He was just a college kid driving a tomato truck. So he became quite enamored with the idea of transcending the entire inefficient industry with better ways of working. Um, he was developing some quite libertarian ideas at the time about freedom and accountability. And so basically boiled his philosophy down into these two core principles and had the idea of implementing these inside a real organization. And if you think about these two principles, they are, in a sense, the two most important principles of human interaction. If you imagine a world where every single person abandoned the use of force against other people, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And of course, that's not reality. We understand that's not realistic, but that's not the point. The point is the closer we can approach that ideal state inside an organizational context, the more space we open up for human happiness, harmony, prosperity, teamwork, high performance, and all the good things of life. If you take the second principle of keeping commitments, imagine a world where every single human being always did what they said they were going to do 100% of the time. That would be an amazing world to live in. Our economies would flourish, our people would flourish and thrive. It would be amazing. And we know that's not reality. We understand that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is the closer we get to that ideal state inside an organization, the better the organization performs, the more space you open up for happiness and high performance. So those were his bedrock principles, and he was very excited to implement those at Morningstar in 1990.
The idea of not having bosses, I mean, that inherently appeals to me. I mean, I often had an allergic reaction to the word boss. I'm sure you know the origins of the word boss. It comes from the Dutch word baas, which was referring to master in slavery, right? And so we adopted, as we have done with so many other things, we've adopted the language of slavery and the military into the world of business, right? And we've kind of made business into that kind of autocratic, top-down, command and control, kind of an institution. So yeah, I don't think anybody should have a boss, but do we need leaders? Do we need coaches? Do we need, I mean, I can honor my commitments, but how do I know which commitments are the best ones to make? So where does all that come from without having guidance or somebody you might call a leader or somebody you might consider a coach? Is there no room in this way of operating for those roles?
Yes, there absolutely is. By the way, Morningstar does have a boss. The boss at Morningstar is the mission statement.
I love that. I love that framing of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you walk into the factory during operations and ask an operator, "Who's your boss?" They'll say, "The factory is my boss."
The factory, not the vision.
Well, the mission of the enterprise is to operate, create tomato paste that meets the product and service expectations of customers in a cost-effective, environmentally responsible manner. So they will say, yeah, the mission, in the way we implement the mission is by operating the factory at a high level. So the mission's the boss, and yeah, we need leaders, we need coaches. Morningstar is very much about natural leadership. So no one has a title, no one has command authority. No one can walk up to another person and say, stop doing X and start doing Y. No one can unilaterally terminate the employment of another person. Everything is accomplished through request and response. Now, if you make a request of someone, it can be a very minor request, like, please hand me a pencil, or it could be a major request, like, I'm requesting that you terminate your services to Morningstar. And so there's a wide range of requests that people make every day along that spectrum. And people have a professional obligation to respond to requests in a professional manner. Um, and that's how people interact. Leadership is natural leadership. So the only definition of a leader is whether or not you have followers. You attract followers through trust, respect, and communication, not by position or title or command. And so people that are able to attract followers become leaders. Natural leadership is stronger, better leadership. If you can create followers through the process of trust and communication, then you're a very strong leader. If you can exercise leadership just by telling people what to do with the expectation that your commands will be obeyed, we believe that causes leadership muscles to atrophy and get weaker. And so Morningstar is very much about the concept of natural leadership.
Wow. So I imagine that hiring the so-called right people that would thrive in such an environment is key, because there are people who want structure, they want to be told what to do, and or they become accustomed to that, let's say, right? And so we want to hire people who have this energy, this motivation. Is that a factor that some people just don't thrive in this kind of an environment?
Not everyone's going to thrive in this environment. Not everyone's going to seek this environment. Even people who grew up in this environment may change their approach to work over time. Who knows? Human emotion and energy is very dynamic. We think that organizational self-management benefits everyone. Some people benefit a lot and take full advantage of it. Some people may benefit just a tiny amount. We think it benefits everyone. Um, yeah, in the network at Morningstar, if people want to arrange mini hierarchies where for example, I want to arrange a contract with my colleagues such that they organize my workday for me. That's okay. It's the voluntariness of the association that makes it okay. They're not being coerced. They're just making an agreement between each other. That's perfectly okay. Um, so yes, we try to hire people at Morningstar who are energetic and take initiative and gravitate toward this way of working. And at the same time, it works pretty much for everybody that works there. And people make all kinds of interpersonal arrangements with each other that make it work for them. And so that's what the freedom part of this is all about.
Well, I love that you've written about the fact that there's a difference between this self-management and empowerment. So a big word nowadays in business lingo is this empowered organization. How do we empower our people? And you contrast that with this approach. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, and empowerment programs have been around for a while now, probably 20 years now. And so what I write is that uh, in self-management, we never talk about empowerment, or rarely, because empowerment implies that one person with power is lending their power to a subordinate who has less power. And the problem with that is that anything you lend can be repossessed. So if I'm a boss and I ask Susie to draw up, design a new empowerment program, and I don't like the way she did it, so I fire her or transfer her to something else. That's not really empowerment. I haven't really empowered her. I just lent my power on a temporary basis and then took it back. So self-management I write is beyond empowerment. Self-management is power itself because you have all the power you need to pursue your mission the first day you start work. You know, the power to build relationships, to become a leader, to acquire resources, and to deliver your best work. And everyone has that from day one. And what they choose to do with it is up to them because they have free will.
To make that work, there's a couple of guiding, sort of processes that you have um, inside the organization around how you get agreements, how you make commitments. Um, Maybe talk a little bit about what you think are one or two of the most important processes that are a part of making self-management work.
Right. So making the commitments and memorializing commitments is very important. Morningstar ran for about 6 years without that mechanism of making interpersonal commitments among colleagues. When it doubled in size, when it built its second factory, we realized that we needed some kind of mechanism of coordination that was more substantial than verbal commitments. And so our founder developed the colleague letter of understanding, or CALU acronym. And that is essentially a document that outlines the who, what, why, when, where, and how of work, and memorializes that in an agreement by and between team members. We call them colleagues. We don't call uh, workers at Morningstar employees because, to Raj's earlier point about language and the word boss, if you look at the dictionary definition of employee, it's somebody who works for another person for pay. And that's not a very inspiring definition for most Gen Z workers, at least, or anyone else. And so people are colleagues because they're professionals. And so professional colleagues get together. They may be working on a team. Take an evaporation team, for example, and they're working together, and so they forge individual personal commercial mission statements. You know, why am I here? Why do I work here? What does excellence like in my role? How does what I do support the mission, vision, values, and principles of the enterprise? And they work through that. Their missions have to make sense to themselves and to the people with whom they work most closely. Then they work through their list of services. So what are the exact services I'm providing as a member of this team? What value am I creating? What am I delivering? In many cases, they work through decision rights. What is the scope and quantum of my decision making authority for each of the services that I'm providing? Am I the sole decision maker? Am I making a decision with another colleague? Do I need consent or consensus from fellow colleagues to make decisions and the like? And then who do I need to connect with? Well, certainly people connect with their own immediate team members, but they also may connect with people who are just upstream or downstream in the value chain as well. What resources do I require? Do I need a laptop computer? Do I need a pickup truck? Do I need uh, training, weeks of training and education every year? What does that look like? How do I work with people? How do I handle conflict? What's my personal user's manual? How do I like to receive information? People are free to work through all those aspects of work. Most people connect with between 7 and 12 fellow colleagues, and they memorialize these colleague letters of understanding. These are contracts, they're enforceable contracts. And again, that gets down to the libertarian idea of personal accountability and personal responsibility. And so people work out these agreements, and they're free to revise them and renegotiate them at any time. Usually, they're looked at quite seriously at least once a year, but often more often. And this is the source of long-term accountability. So all the commitments that people make on a long-term, recurring, continuous basis are memorialized in these colleague letters of understanding.
It implies here that you make a pretty big investment in building people's self-awareness. You talked about, you know, uh, knowing how they like to communicate, knowing how to do conflict management, probably knowing how to have coaching conversations, all of that. Um, Tell me a little bit about how you developed the capability internally within Morningstar to be able to help people at multiple levels in the organization build that sort of self-awareness, or that, some people call it EQ at some level, but those skills, talents, and to raise their EQ in order to operate in this kind of environment.
Yeah, EQ is crucial. So as people are working their way through the hiring process as candidates, they get a large dose of expectations for high performing self management along the way. Um, a person may go through two or three or more group interviews before becoming a colleague at Morningstar. And in those interviews, um, they are given lots of information about self management, and they're free to ask whatever questions come to mind. Um, the people that do the hiring at Morningstar are the colleagues with whom a person will end up working. So if we're hiring an industrial electrician, the people interviewing that person are industrial electricians. So, clerks hire clerks, electricians hire electricians, quality associates hire quality associates, because no one's more invested in getting the right people on the bus and the people, who will be working side by side with that person for perhaps years to come. And so, they're very careful about, hiring people who will fit, and demonstrate an ability to work well as a self-manager. Um, so then, okay, now the person's hired. So what do we do then? Well, there's a very intense orientation. That was really the purpose of creating the Self Management Institute in 2008, was to instantiate the principles and practices of self management inside the organization. That was a major, major consideration. So lots of training. So a person comes on board, a full day orientation, very intensive, all aspects. Then there's coaching that is ongoing, mini sessions, additional syllabi have been developed to elevate EQ specifically, teamwork, understanding facilitation and coaching and mentoring and all those skills. We even developed a mini MBA at one point to deliver pretty high level business skills to anyone that was interested. And so we just actually ran a cohort recently in business process management for technicians and mechanics in the factories. And so now we've got kind of a SEAL Team 6 of process experts going around the country, optimizing their individual processes. So this is an ongoing, never-ending effort. There's an ambassadorship program of about 50 colleagues dispersed throughout the enterprise that provide ongoing coaching and mentoring on a continuous basis. And so, keeping the level of awareness high and developing skills and sharpening skills is a never-ending effort inside Morningstar.
I was thinking, Doug, of other such efforts to try to rethink the organizational form and the approach to work and so forth, which is, as I said, for the most part, borrowed from the military and command and control and all of that, right? The organizational forms and the approach to leadership. But I know that D Hawk at Visa had talked about the chaotic organization probably around the same time. Conscious capitalism actually had adopted something called holacracy, which I'm sure you've heard of. We used that for a few years in our executive committee and ultimately abandoned it. I know companies like Nordstrom, they have like their employee handbook is basically one page and it's one rule: use your best judgment at all times. That's all they tell. There's no other rules in the company. So there are various people trying different things. What To what degree has this idea spread, first of all, beyond Morningstar, or is there an effort to try to have it spread? And what other things that you see out there that are comparable and also viable alternatives to the traditional way of running things?
Thank you. It's a great question. I created this model called the interactive periodic table of the future of work, and I tried to capture all the various models that are out there. This was 5 or 6 years ago, and there were a lot of them. So you mentioned holacracy, and then there's teleocracy and workplace democracy and humanocracy, and those are just the crassies, and then there's all kinds of other approaches as well, and it's all great. I mean, what we're talking about directionally, trying to create workplaces that honor our humanity, right, and give people a chance to express themselves. The need to be creative is one of the deepest human needs that exists. It's equivalent to the physical need for food and water. It's a psychological need, and so how do we liberate that and create human organizations that thrive? So it's all great. People try different things. I found holacracy to be a little complex. I tried to read
Hmm.
the model constitution at one point, and I did see command authority embedded in various places that seemed a little arbitrary. If it works for you, great, whatever. But what I love about D Hawk, and thank you for mentioning D, I really regret not going to meet him and interview him before he passed. One of my heroes, I love his quote, uh, complex rules cause stupid
Hmm.
behavior. Simple rules allow for complex, intelligent behavior. And that's where we try to land at companies like Morningstar. Complex, intelligent behavior based on simplicity. So 2 simple rules at Morningstar: don't use force, keep commitments. If you think about a traffic roundabout, and there are very complex traffic roundabouts in the world, Swindon Circle in England, 7 roundabouts in one. You only need 2 simple rules to navigate any roundabout anywhere in the world. Roundabouts have far greater productivity, far less pollution, far safer than traditional organizations because they're based on simple rules. So that's what we strive for at Morningstar. And if you look at nature, nature uses lots of very simple rules as well. And so, um, how do we make it as simple as possible? Are there other organizations trying what we did at Morningstar? I would say yes. One of them tried it without my knowledge, and that was a young leader, Stephanie Gloden at the University of Phoenix, Apollo Group. She had a business unit of IT and customer service. She just got a hold of one of my books and implemented self-management. She said it took about a year. I actually met her after they implemented self-management there and sat around a table with her 9 or 10 leaders, and to a person, they said, "You know what? These principles not only elevated our lives at work and made work better, but they made every aspect of our lives better, our personal lives, our civic and community lives. Everything got better when we embraced the most fundamental principles of human interaction." So the benefits were holistic. And so, do I see lots of companies embracing organizational self-management in the Morningstar mode? Not necessarily, but I do see a lot of interest in pursuing directionally these better ways of working on a wide scale basis, and more so since the COVID epidemic.
I was going to ask you about the personal side because I can immediately see spillovers into parenting as well as relationships, right? Between spouses, for example. So, have you seen evidence of that? That this has transformed people's personal lives as well, or are there any nuances there that some of this doesn't work in that environment? Um, what have you heard from your people?
Well, if you go to Morningstar, the retention rates are quite high. I mean, sky high in relationship to most of the outside world. Um, we've had years where we've had at Morningstar a 100% return rate from one season to the next among seasonal workers, many of whom return to Mexico in the off season and they're laid off for 8.5 months. And they come back year after year after year because they love the culture, they love the environment, and they love the social aspect and reuniting with their friends every single year. So when I was measuring those numbers, it was in the 90 plus percentile, a return rate of seasonal workers. The longevity of the tenure of year-round workers, the professionals, the um, technicians, for example, sky high. And most of them, I think, if you dropped in to interview them, they would say, "I couldn't work in a traditional organization with a boss. I couldn't go back to that. They have too much freedom."
I'm curious. You mentioned a lot more interest post COVID. How did Morningstar manage through COVID? What's the reaction of the biological system in a sense when you've got this virus, pun intended, coming in and suddenly there's radical uncertainty and nobody knows what's going to happen and nobody knows how to predict production schedules or anything. It's what was the how did the organism react?
As a food company, Morningstar was considered critical infrastructure for the national food supply. So it was, it needed to operate. It needed to keep going forward. And the operations, the factories and the factory equipment is largely outside. And so, and the field operations are outside. And so those operations just pretty much continued on a steady plane. Inside the factories, of course, protocols had to be developed for social distancing and masking and all the other requirements. And so certain individuals inside the factories have a large scope of commercial responsibility, and they took the decision rights and they undertook the setting up the protocols and making sure that people followed them. And so they did. I can say that as a contractor to Morningstar and delivering some education and training, that just continued on. Morningstar has a training facility that is also a hotel and restaurant facility, and we just kept delivering classes there, socially distanced, of course, and as safe as possible, and lots of hand sanitizer, but we never stopped. We never slowed down, and, actually, we think that was a major, key element in, sustaining self-management during that critical time.
So maybe COVID wasn't as big a deal for you guys in some ways because of that critical infrastructure. But I'm curious, what were some of the biggest business challenges that you faced, if you could name one, and how did you manage through that business challenge with this model?
So are you referring to COVID, specifically or just
No, no, at any point when, in your history of being there, whether it was 2008 or something else, was there a moment where the business was like, "Wow, we had a shock to the business system," and how did you handle the shock?
so shocks to the business system, pretty rare. The demand for the product is pretty steady and sort of increases with the population. Um, there's sort of a price cycle, a 7-year price cycle in the commodity industry that, certain years causes you to promote exports more than other years, et cetera. And the founder's been in this business now since 1982 and understands all those cycles intimately well. And there are economists on staff at Morningstar that study these things as well. Huge surprises, shocks, very, very rare. There are challenges that arise. So there are legal challenges, for example. We had One year I got an invoice on my desk for $1 million from the state of California, and they wanted to suddenly charge sales tax on recyclable wooden containers, and we said, well, that's not right. We've never done that before. The whole purpose of promoting recycling of containers is what the purpose of having no tax was in the past, and so we challenged that. It took a number of years, and we had to pull together the entire industry, and suppliers to the industry and legal talent to the industry and finally prevailed. And, I can't imagine what the savings and sales taxes have been over the last 15 years, but I'm sure it's in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars at this point. But, those kinds of challenges just they come along and you deal with them as best you can. And so that's pretty much what everybody in the industry does, and Morningstar does it very assertively and very well for the most part.
Well, Doug, as you know, we're about conscious capitalism, and I'm thinking about the connection between self management and being a conscious business with the purpose and caring for our stakeholders and having conscious leadership and a caring culture. Do you think self management is an important element to that? And could that, in fact, change the perception of capitalism, which, as you know, is pretty negative overall, and especially in the U.S. among young people?
I'd like to think it could. I'd like to think that if people can embrace these simple principles, which are true principles, and incorporate those into commercial activity and commercial life, then we can hopefully have a rebirth of capitalism with and understand it through fresh eyes as a way to elevate the human spirit and elevate the opportunities for creativity and optimize our ability to create value for other human beings. I think it's a virtuous, uplifting approach to operating a commercial enterprise. We want to create profits. Profits are like the applause that you get for doing a good job. It means you're creating more value than you're destroying in the process of creating that value. And you know, would love every person, every human being to participate in that and experience that and make the world a better place. Absolutely.
So, one of the things we say these days, Doug, is we want to celebrate and elevate capitalism, particular elevate the practice of capitalism. So, this idea of self management and the way that you've done it, you're one of the world's leading experts in this space, right? If what you don't know about this is probably not worth knowing. So, I'm curious, in your now outside role of trying to help companies go on this journey, what are one or two of the best examples that you have where you think you've been able to move a company in this direction in a significant way?
Well, I would point to Stephanie Gloden at the Apollo Group. She's got one or two YouTube videos up and describing her journey. And, to be honest, I don't know where they're at today on that journey because she's gone on to other things. But the effect she had on that part of her company at that moment in time was quite energizing and very, very beautiful. So that's one. Other companies have experimented with organizational self-management. What it's going to take leaders who are idealistic and
Mm,
who have willpower. So if you don't have leaders with lots of staying power and willpower, then it's not going to work. And my dear friend Peter Kessenbaum was one of the great leadership consultants and he just passed this last year. He was the subject of an amazing Fast Company article in early 2000 called "Do You Have the
Mhm.
Will to Lead?" And he
Mm,
consulted with some of the biggest CEOs and leaders on the planet. He got forward through a wildcat strike, for example, with his leadership teaching. And it's really about courage. You have to have enormous reservoir of courage to make progress in this area. And Aristotle said courage is the leadership attribute that makes all other leadership attributes possible. Start with courage,
mm,
balance that with deep ethics, caring, kindness, compassion, nurturing, support, empathy, and encouragement, and have a really clear-eyed sense of reality, and then a vision for a desired future state into which you can invite people, not command them. And if you can do that, then you have a chance of making this work. So there are great experiments out there right now, great initiatives. We're watching the Bayer Company, for example, and they're doing some amazing things. And so I wish them all the best and every leader that pursues this path.
it'll be fun to watch and see what happens there. And they've got huge business challenges aside from the fact that they're trying this big change.
Doug, you mentioned the word empathy, and I was wondering about that because there are times, yeah, if people should honor their commitments, right? But then things happen in their life. Simon Sinek talks about this. In most companies, if somebody hasn't met their goals, you go to them, say, "This is not okay. You're out, or you will be out." Or the empathetic response to say, "You haven't met your goal. Are you okay?" Right? Like, what's going on? And things happen in life, right? So, how do you systematically provide for empathy in this operating system? Or is it simply, what have you done for me lately?
So one of the biggest challenges of leadership is managing polarities. So, and Kestenbaum makes that explicitly clear. Managing, and his whole model is balancing courage and ethics and reality and vision. Um, so his idea of uh, this idea of empathy is balanced with the idea of accountability. Freedom and accountability that's the biggest polarity that we have to manage in self-management and maybe in life. Freedom and accountability. So the idea of accountability is, okay, I made a commitment, and commitments are serious. I mean, they're like contracts, and so if I make a commitment, there's specific language for commitment making. Commitments have structure. They have a life cycle. Um, and Fernando Flores is one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence that talks about commitment making. A very serious enterprise, and they are at Morningstar, for example, and wherever I teach. Um, and yet you must balance that with understanding and empathy because you don't know if someone fails to meet a commitment, you don't know why. Maybe they had a health issue, maybe there's something else you don't know about. So you have to ask, you have to find out, okay, well, you know, you promised this and, it didn't show up. And so you have to ask why. And so teaching people to ask why and caring is absolutely crucial to making this work. You can't just go around and be a martinet and hold people accountable without caring because they'll detect your lack of caring instantly. And as I talked about in natural leadership, you will lose followers. And if you don't care, you'll lose followers to the point where people will not work with you anymore, and your existence at the company it becomes moot. There's no reason for you to be there. No one wants to work with you, and so that kind of natural um, aspect is very, very important to empathy. If you have empathy, then you're going to attract more people because they know you care.
I'm curious, you mentioned AI, And of course, it's not just AI. We also have quantum computing and nanotechnology and robotics and biotechnology. All of these areas are being extraordinarily disruptive and will be over the next 5 years. Put on top of that, pretty a certain degree of uncertainty about geopolitical economics and where all that's going. Um, how does your business manage that? 'Cause remember, one of the early discussions you and I had was around strategy, and what does strategy mean in a self-managed business? Well, now I'm thinking not only strategy, but an agile, adaptive, innovative strategy in the face of all of this and self-management. Put those two pieces together for me.
So in a self-managed enterprise, everyone has the same amount of power over other people, which is zero. We have the power to make commitments, and to do our best work. And obviously, some people have a broad scope of commercial responsibility because they have deep commercial understanding and they understand markets and strategy and customers and stakeholders and all the rest. And other people have a very narrow scope of commercial responsibility. I mean, we have wonderful people who some have come back every year for 30 years to sort tomatoes. So there's a huge spectrum of responsibility. So people that everyone has an affirmative obligation to share relevant information, whether or not requested. So that's actually an explicit requirement of working at Morningstar, for example. So it kind of increases the surface area of the organization that's exposed to the outside world and can detect opportunities and threats and risks and all the rest. And that works great. Um, and everyone brings information into the organism. Now, people with a broad scope of commercial understanding are always watching the world and looking for threats and risks and opportunities. And then how do those get incorporated into strategy? Um, yeah, we bring those to the table. They get discussed and debated. Um, there are lots of threats and technological changes to be aware of and incorporate into the business, and those have to happen all the time. So it's emergent strategy. It's making contingency plans. It's looking for opportunities. Is a competitor shutting down part of their business, or could it be acquired, for example? What's the capacity of the industry relative to the demand? Should there be a new factory built, for example? So all these things are always under consideration, never ends. It's the strategy is emergent. There's no 5-year plan. Those ideas of, long-term strategy and this is what we're going to do, you kind of have to set those aside because the world, as you said, Timothy, is so uncertain. You just have to make room for the uncertainty and then, take advantage of the opportunities that come along and deal with the threats when they come along, like the bin tax.
Have you guys made some significant acquisitions?
I have to be careful when I answer a question that starts with you guys because I'm not one of the guys anymore. So
Mhm.
I'm an outsider looking in, doing some consulting work there and education. Um, yeah, the founder has acquired some operations along the way. Absolutely. Um, and is those are just strategic opportunities that come along in any industry. Yeah.
And I guess the question that lays behind that is, and I can't remember, I think at some point you guys bought or acquired something in Italy or expanded a little globally. But my underlying question is that when you go into an existing operation and you now are trying to bring in this different way of managing what's been probably a relatively traditional business, what's that process look like for the first year or two?
So I hope to find out soon. I hope to find out soon. It's really figuring out what are the artifacts, what are the principles, what are the mindsets, and then what are the practices that need to be overlaid or brought in and to replace old ways of working, and then what are all the artifacts attached to that. That's something I've been thinking about for 15 years.
Well, Doug, you said you wanted to keep it light and fun. I don't know if we did that so far, but we like to end that way at least. So we have some rapid fire questions. Starting with what book or books have influenced you the most regarding your thinking on freedom or leadership?
The one that influenced me the most was Freedom and Accountability at Work by Peter
Hmm.
Kestenbaum and Peter Block. I took that with me to Africa on a trip there, a business trip there, and I read it at one sitting. And it's not an easy read, but it's a deep read, but it's a good read, and it's really influenced my thinking. I've come to realize that we as individuals are 100% responsible as leaders for the way our organizations turn out. And the way we make that happen is to make sure that everyone with whom we work understands that they are 100% responsible for the way the organization turns out. Peter Kassenbaum he was my best friend over the last decade, and spent a lot of time with him and absorbed as much as I could from him.
There's a quote of Peter's that I've used, I love, which he said, "We have reached such explosive levels of freedom that we are now in charge of our own mutation,
Yes, I love that. Yeah,
our own evolution, our own growth." So thank you for that. Now, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, uh, who would that be?
Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, that would be great. I would like to join that dinner. That would be good. Is there a daily practice that you have or a ritual, something that keeps you grounded?
Just every day I wake up with a deep sense of gratitude.
Mm.
And just I feel like I'm the luckiest person on earth to be able to do what I do and share what I share and talk to great people like you, Raj, and Timothy, and other people around the world that are very influential.
Yeah, gratitude is so vital. What is something that you've changed your mind about recently?
My commitment to physical health and exercise. Yeah, started lifting weights and just
Mm.
realizing this is really beneficial. I need to keep doing this.
Yeah, no, I've come to that in the last few years. Prioritizing our health is important as we get older, but we should do it anyway early on, but we don't. And lastly, if you weren't doing this work, what do you think you'd be doing instead?
I'd be a travel writer.
Hmm.
I was in
Interesting.
Ireland last week and just
Hmm.
making notes about all the neat stuff that I saw there, and looking at the Book of Kells and historical artifacts and different types of whiskeys and all kinds of things that are
Yeah.
flavors and sights and sounds and tastes from around the world. That would be a travel blogger, I think.
And the Guinness factory.
Yeah, I missed
So,
that
what are
one.
your favorite places? What are some of the favorite places you've been to?
Well, I must say, one of the most fascinating and interesting places was Siberia.
Wow.
So, believe it or
Hmm.
not, there are some very progressive business leaders in Russia, and one of them flew me to his oil and gas equipment factory in Chelyabinsk in Siberia, and
Hmm.
I delivered a self-management workshop for them. And then he took me to his home in the woods, and it was one of the most delightful, beautiful places I've ever seen. Reminded me very much of Oregon and Washington, Western Oregon,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it was an unforgettable experience.
I did not see that coming.
Yeah. It's off the beaten track. I know they have a lake there, Lake Baikal, which I was invited to something years ago. It's supposed to be the deepest, and biggest lake by some measures right there. So wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Doug. It was such a pleasure
My
having this time
pleasure.
with you, and it's really quite an education, actually. You're a very, very deep thinker, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciated having you here. And I highly recommend that you read up on Doug and the books that he has written as a really good introduction to how you do this in practice. No Limits Enterprise. And thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed today's talk, then please, on whatever channel you're listening, hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to go over to Apple and iTunes and leave us a score or send us some comments, we always enjoy that. And thank you to Rainbow Productions for today's production of our podcast, and to Conscious Capitalism, Inc. for their support of this program. And we'll see you all in the next week.